And I only change characters by putting like towels on my head or motorbike. It's the worst thing you've ever seen, and it's never been released. Hi, I'm Shane Meadows, and these are my film first with BAFTA. Well, the first film I ever remember seeing, let me just have a think about that, because I'll do something rubbish and regret it. God, that's an amazing question. Okay, so the first film I can properly remember watching when I was a child was a film called The Champ, and I watched it with my dad. And we were watching this film, and it's obviously amazing. It was all about boxing, and then it had this like the saddest ending of any film I'd ever seen at the time. And me and my dad were sort of sat like sort of two chairs apart. He was on one end of the sofa, and I was on a little chair, and we were both crying at The Champ. And I remember that. He was pretending he'd got like snot or something, but yeah, he was sobbing as well. The first film that I shouldn't really have watched when I was young, there was a season, I think it was on ITV, and it was called X-Rated. And I'd heard that some of them had sort of like bits of flesh and things in them. And obviously as a sort of 12, 13-year-old boy, I wanted to see these slightly erotic horror films that were on. And my mum kept saying I couldn't. And I convinced her that they were horror films and there was nothing rude in them. And she said she'd stay up for the first 10 minutes to watch it with me to make sure. On the very first scene, someone came out onto a pulpit naked, and I got sent to bed. Oh, do you know what? There's an amazing guy that works for Empire that he told me the name of the film because I described it to him. And I said, it starts in a church. This woman kind of comes out onto the pulpit, the vicar's there, and then the clothes come off. And he told me what it was, but I can't remember. He's a guy that's got a big long ponytail. He knows every film that was ever made in the world.
Fine, we'll tweet him.
Yeah, please do, yeah. Well, the first TV programme that absolutely blew me away was a programme called One Summer. And I think it was a 3 or 4-parter written by Willie Russell. And it was about two young lads from Liverpool. I think they were called Billy and Icky. They got involved in some kind of knife fight, some gang altercation in Liverpool and ran away to Wales. And I was going through quite a sort of tricky time around 13, 14, getting in and out of lots of trouble. And I remember watching that and seeing how it unfolded and the way that it kind of handled the consequences of actions. And I was absolutely bowled over with it, to the point that it was one of those series that couldn't be released for some reason for many, many years. And it finally got released, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years. And I bought it on every possible available version that came out. But that was the first series that really put me in the back of my chair, and I never forgot it. The first film I think that made me want to direct, or that made me think that there may be a chance I could direct, was Mean Street. And it wasn't because I thought I could be like Scorsese. It was because I was at college and I was doing a photography course, and I tried to go on and do an O-level in film studies, and everyone was talking about Taxi Driver and Reservoir Dogs, and they're all talking about all of these kind of films, and it all felt completely out of my reach. And I never really thought I could do it. And then I remember I'd gone to do this photography degree. I got thrown off the course a year in, and I'd got this really small collection of VHS films and a lot of time to watch them. And I watched Mean Street, and obviously everyone had been talking about Goodfellas. Goodfellas was the sort of archetypal sort of gangster film. But when I saw Mean Street, Martin Scorsese had made a film about much, much smaller time crooks, and I'd grown up in a place with people a bit like that. The opening scene, Robert De Niro puts like a really crap bomb in like a bin and just blows a small bin up. And there's the most amazing fight in a pool hall where no one seems to even get punched in it. But and that really reminded me of my childhood. And I thought, well, if Martin Scorsese could start by making films about people in his own neighbourhood and then, grow into something like Goodfellas, it made me think that maybe the first step didn't have to be me overreaching and making something that I wasn't capable of making. The very first short film I made was an original version of Where's the Money Ronnie. Where's the Money Ronnie that came out with Small Time had other people kind of in it, other cast members. But because I'd been thrown off this college course, everyone had gone home, and so there was no one else there. So it's kind of like a Where's the Money Ronnie, but I'm the only person in it. And I only change characters by putting like towels on my head or motorbike. It's the worst thing you've ever seen, and it's never been released. But yeah, that was the first thing I made. Yeah, it's. I am archiving my short films at the moment, and Where's the Money Ronnie 1, the worst film that was ever made, is in there. So who knows? Yeah, it'd be on about the same time as that horror film I was trying to watch. I think the most amazing moment for me was working on film for the first time, because I'd made a film called Small Time, which the budget was about £5,000. We shot it on Digibeta, which was a good camera, but then about a year after that, I was working on my first feature film, a film called 24/7, and back at the time, you would get the rushes back from your film and go and watch them in the cinema, but they had no sound on them. They were like mute rushes, and everything I'd seen blown up. You'd go to like a video festival, video projectors just weren't great, you know. And I went in with this black and white footage, and they put it on in a cinema screen. And you know that magic of film that people talk about, films like El Paradiso. You hear Martin Scorsese talking about walking into a cinema, you know, in New York, and that was the moment for me. Was actually seeing something on a screen 50 foot across that you'd shot the day before. And then what was really funny was, because some of the actors came to watch it with me, they could all remember what they'd said, so they were doing the voices while it was on the screen, and it was almost like I sort of nearly had the sound attached to it, but that was the most magical moment for me, actually realising how incredible this kind of 100-year-old medium was. So This Is England, I suppose really was something that I'd always played around with autobiographical subject matter, and as I got a little bit older and I kind of realised you know, that when I was 11, 12 years old and I, you know, got into being a skinhead and hung around with this gang, sometimes it's not until you're a little further away from your past and from your friends that you actually realise how special a time was and how crazy a time was as well. Because to start hanging around with a gang at a time where skinheads had this enormous love and basically existed because of Trojan reggae, that within a year or 2 years that a lot of skinheads were now a right-wing faction that were racist. You know, to see that transition and to go in it from 11 to 13 and see that unfold, I realised, and through the course of Thatcher, 3.5, 4 million people on the dole, it was a period that I kind of lived through as a kid and had no idea politics had anything to do with it, and so wanted to revisit it through a child's eye. I'd be lying if I said I thought, you know, I'll have a series come out of this, and there was no yardstick really at the time. You know, any spin-offs that had happened for films didn't usually work out, but I'd always had a sadness that characters like Lol in particular, because we write a large history for each character in every film that I do. Everyone knows who they are and where they're from, but feature films can be quite restrictive in terms of being able to get everyone's story arcs across, and so I always knew there was this incredible untold story, you know, in Lol's life in particular. I think what happened is Channel 4 had screened it, you know, a few years after it had been on TV and got really good figures on Film 4, and were just saying it's such a shame we never made any sequels, and the conversation started from there. You know, so it wasn't completely planned, but there'd always been this slight feeling of loss that so many of these characters had so many incredible backstories that had never been explored, and that gave us the chance. The first time I knew the Gallows Pole was going to be my next project was coming to London to talk about a completely different project, and I got the book sent through. Someone had sent the book to me and said I think the author was, you know, liked my work and, you know, thought it might be up my street, and obviously I looked at it and thought, you know, something set in the 1700s. I couldn't quite see myself in it, but I thought, well, if this, you know, author thinks it might be for me, and I read the book and I was so kind of bowled over with it and so taken with it, and because especially it felt like it could be about a community, and I've realised I don't just want to tell a film with one hero or, you know, a leading man and a leading lady. I do love to work with multiple characters and with communities. It's kind of a Robin Hood story that is actually true, that they've got evidence for, yet Robin Hood that no one knows is true is the one that's out there and Kevin Costner attached himself to. Whereas David Hartley, I had no idea existed. I knew people used to clip coins, but I didn't realise one of the greatest pound-for-pound crimes in British history had happened out of this tiny little sort of part of West Yorkshire, and so I was smitten with it, and I was maybe 6 months into doing another project, and just I knew I had to kind of to do it because it was too big an opportunity to pass up.